Police in Italy have arrested a Ukrainian man
suspected of coordinating the 2022 Nord Stream pipeline sabotage.
This is a huge development because for so long there has been mystery around who was responsible.
Well, this is one of the biggest international whodunits of modern times. The sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline at the bottom of the Baltic Sea has been blamed on everyone, from President Joe Biden to MI6, Russia, and of course Ukraine. And now we have the biggest breakthrough in the investigation so far, the arrest of a Ukrainian man in Italy. But does that mean Ukraine did it?
All I know is throughout this mainly serves Russian interests.
But our own CIA had already warned allies that a plot emanating from Ukraine was in the works.
More from them in a moment, but first a reminder of how the news broke and who was being blamed at the time.
Like a boiling cauldron, the busy Baltic Sea bursting with gas.
Around the world, people are asking, who could have done this?
When the Nord Stream pipelines blew up in September 2022 in the heat of the Ukraine war, accusations flew.
It's the latest in a series of such incidents, which Western governments are calling sabotage and are blaming Russia.
Western media and some politicians pinpointed Russia.
At this point, the assessment is that Russia was behind it,
accusing it of sabotaging its own pipeline.
It doesn't seem to make sense if you're thinking in a rational actor scenario.
While Moscow accused first the UK.
Russia's defense ministry is blaming British Navy personnel for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Then Ukraine, and then Washington.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities.
Russia seized on an old quote from Joe Biden.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. I promise you we'll be able to do it.
Veteran American reporter Seymour Hersh, who made his name uncovering the nefarious dealings inside the US government, said he had evidence showing Washington's culpability.
It wasn't all CIA. It was a joint group that was set up at the direction of Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor.
Here's what Biden did. He said, I'm in a big war with Ukraine. It's not looking good. And I know winter's coming, and if it's going to be bad, then we're going to open up the gas line. We took away that option.
It was soon clear, though, that few really knew what had happened beyond a few basic details. In September 2022, deep at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, a series of underwater explosions ruptured the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines. Though they were not operational at the time due to tensions over Ukraine, they were still potentially key routes for Russian gas into Germany. Investigators proved that this was almost certainly caused by explosives, but it has taken 3 years to make the first arrest.
Well, let's take a closer look at that arrest now and the debate about whether Ukraine's president could have been involved.
This is an absolutely stunning development.
Italian police have taken into custody a Ukrainian national identified only as Serhiy K. He was arrested in Rimini, northern Italy, on a European warrant issued by German authorities. German prosecutors allege Serhiy K coordinated the sabotage, which they believe was carried out by a group using a sailing yacht called Andromeda, chartered from Rostock in Germany. The vessel was reportedly rented using shell companies and forged ID documents. According to German authorities, Serhiy K was an organiser, not one of the divers they believe planted explosives on the pipeline. The fact the suspect is Ukrainian and reportedly a former member of Ukraine's SBU Special Forces is being seen as the first major clue about who was really behind the sabotage of Nord Stream. But is that the whole story?
President Zelensky reportedly approved the plan, but later tried to stop it after a Dutch intelligence agency learned of the plot and told the CIA. But his commander-in-chief at the time, Valery Zaluzhny, forged ahead despite Zelensky's U-turn.
Let's bring in our guest now, and today we are joined by the geopolitical strategist and energy specialist Thomas O'Donnell and Kelly B. Vlahos, who is a writer and editor of online magazine Responsible Statecraft. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Thomas, if I could start with you. What do you make of the arrest? What does it tell you about the likely entity, if you like, that attacked the pipeline?
I would assume that the German police, after they had already taken information from the Swedish police, from the Danish police, from a long investigation, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. But this person undoubtedly was probably involved in some way, they say, as a mastermind. Now, the question is for whom and why and who benefited from this. And on that, it doesn't immediately tell us very much, I would say.
And what about the details that they've provided on the suspect, that he's 49 years of age, he's a Ukrainian, reportedly former special forces?
Yes. Well, as we all know, it could be that he did it on behalf of some Ukrainian organization, opposition organization, which is what was said in the press. But then again, we know how the Russians operate. And oftentimes, if they're going to do something and they're afraid the person's going to get caught, it won't be a Russian national. We've seen assassinations here in Berlin that weren't done by Russian nationals, but it became clear it was done on the orders of Mr. Putin. The key thing here is who benefits from this. And if a Ukrainian group did this, it's a mistake to have done such a thing without going through the chain of command and finding out, because I know very well from working with people in the Ukrainian gas sector and executives that immediately they said this serves Russia, because it was Russia that needed a force majeure excuse for having already turned off the gas in Europe that was flowing through these pipes. They were liable for tens of billions of dollars already, and this gave them a partial force majeure. That was the best guess of, I asked a colleague who worked for 30 years negotiating contracts for the Norwegians. And before I could finish the question, force majeure. This gives the Russians force majeure.
Sure. But Thomas, I mean, even after the arrest of a Ukrainian national with possible links to the Ukrainian special forces, in short, you're saying that the most likely culprit is still Russia?
A number of different actors were capable of doing this. All I know is throughout this mainly serves Russian interests.
Kelly, Thomas is still quite cautious despite the arrest. What is your take on the arrest?
Well, my take is that the Germans have been pointing to the Ukrainian military since last year. The Wall Street Journal, in reporting the arrest of this Sergei K., the gentleman who was arrested in Italy this week, basically said that this already had a operational name called Operation Diameter. They said the plot was developed by senior Ukrainian military and Secret Service officers under the command of a senior special forces general commanding the elite army unit. The sabotage plan, and I'm reading from the Wall Street Journal now, internally codenamed Operation Diameter, was ultimately overseen by the then commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces. So this Sergei K. is one of several people involved, the Germans say, and they're all linked to the military. Now, obviously, Zaluzhny has denied that he was part of the plot, but the United States, the CIA, according to leaked documents in May 2023, had already said that they knew that there was a Ukrainian plot, whether it was connected to the government or not, but they knew that there was a Ukrainian plot of former military officials in the works. They warned allies in 2023 or in 2022 before the explosions. President Biden knew about this, and he called President Zelensky and told him. Now, Zelensky has denied any attachment to this plot or to a supposed plot. But our own CIA, the United States Central Intelligence Agency, had already warned allies that a plot emanating from Ukraine was in the works. So all points lead to a Ukrainian involvement.
But Kelly, is it not also true that the American government told them not to go ahead with it?
Absolutely. They told them not to go, supposedly, reportedly, according to these leaked documents in May 2023. They did warn not to go through with it. 3 months later, the explosions happened anyway.
Let me take it back
All
to
of this
Thomas
came
1
out
second,
much
Kelly.
later.
Let's take it back to Thomas because he's in Berlin. And Kelly there saying that the German investigation all leads to the Ukrainian, at least the Ukrainian team, certainly, but maybe even Ukrainian military and higher up. What do you think, Thomas?
Well, really, as I was saying earlier, it may very well be that they find Ukrainian triggermen, you might call them. Everybody that my colleague here from the Quincy Institute has listed is somebody with military expertise, if I understand correctly. I don't hear about anybody with geopolitical or diplomatic expertise or energy expertise who knew what was involved by blowing up this pipeline. So maybe it's a bunch of yahoos who were doing something, thinking that they're serving the country and didn't want, wanted to give their president and higher ups plausible deniability. It could be. And a group like that, I would say, I would look very carefully. The Russians find groups like that very easily. They're very good at this and facilitating them along in a certain direction. I don't know.
Okay.
But that's what I would say.
Kelly, in your excellent article, you say that all of these investigations lead to Ukraine, and suddenly the mainstream media and certain governments, like the British government, don't want to talk about it anymore. Is that true?
When this happened, when the explosions happened in 2022, there was an international outcry over Russia's believed complicity behind these explosions. There was widespread blame for Russia. There were explanations like the one that Thomas just made that they benefited from this. And as time went on, the Swedes said that this was likely not Russia, but then in 2023 passed the investigation over to Germany, which had, like I said, since 2023, suspected Ukrainian involvement. Now, was that a rogue element? Was that military connected? I think that question is still out there, though it does seem that the military is the more plausible explanation in terms of like who was behind this. But what I was saying in that article is that when Russia seemed to be the culprit, or at least the suspected culprit in the minds of the international community and the mainstream media, the Nord Stream pipeline explosions were at the top of the headlines. When it became less clear who the culprit was, and moreover, that it might have been Ukraine, those stories have become far and few between. Der Spiegel in Germany has done a wonderful job at following this and doing deep dives into the investigation. But in terms of the American press, no one really wants to talk about it.
Because it doesn't fit the narrative, I understand. Thomas, back in 2018, 4 years before Putin invaded Ukraine, Trump warned Germany about buying Russian energy. Have a listen to this.
Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia because they got rid of their coal plants, they got rid of their nuclear. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia. I think it's something that NATO has to look at. I think it's very inappropriate. You and I agree that it's inappropriate. I don't know what you can do about it now, but it certainly doesn't seem to make sense that they pay billions of dollars to Russia, and now we have to defend them against Russia.
Thomas, do you think it's a fair criticism of Angela Merkel and the German government as a whole that, to some degree, some large degree, they've enabled and funded Russia's ability to invade Ukraine?
Absolutely. This is what we were myself and colleagues and American diplomats, for the most part, American diplomats, Polish diplomats, Ukrainian diplomats, and experts were warning them actually since about 2011 when the talk first came up about this thing. And as time came on, it became clear, especially after 2014, when Russia had invaded and taken a portion of Ukraine already, and they clearly wanted more, that these pipelines that still, the legacy pipelines, the big old pipelines that were built in the late Soviet era, the fact that they went through there meant that Putin's energy business in Europe was dependent on those pipelines, and this was somewhat of a guarantee, somewhat of a break on him being able to launch a full-scale war. Once he had the pipelines built outside, both the Nord Stream pipelines and there's a South Stream pipeline, this was a mega geopolitical plan. I've heard the Russians talk about it. They deny it, but I've heard them talk about it at meetings. You know, put up slides. This is a geopolitical strategy to go around the north and south of Europe, work with the Germans and anyone else who work with us, so we have access to our market, because Ukraine and Poland and some other countries where their gas went through are not for them geostrategically stable, and there's something might happen between us and them. And that's exactly what happened. When they completed the pipeline, he proceeded to use this overdependence by mediated mainly by the Germans, but other countries in Europe, use this overdependence on gas as a lever to launch an energy war against Europe that was really devastating. At the same time, this had been prepared for a year. So at the same time, he launched the war, the actual war in Ukraine, hoping that the energy war, the cutoff of this gas they were so dependent on, would cause Europe not to show solidarity with Ukraine. With the help of the Americans, they got through it. They were able to survive that winter, but the price is still very high, and they're still really suffering.
Can we just take a very quick look at the energy consequences for all of us and the environmental consequences too?
An estimated 550 million cubic metres of natural gas escaped into the Baltic Sea from the two pipes, the largest known release of methane gas and a serious threat to the environment. The sabotage sent immediate shockwaves through European energy markets. Gas prices jumped 12% on the day the explosions were reported. This, along with the war, saw European wholesale gas prices exceed $350 per megawatt hour. Pre-war, typical prices in major European markets were between $25 to $60 per megawatt hour. It put Europe under severe pressure.
Just a final question then, Thomas. Energy prices, everyone is seeing their energy prices going up. Is that attack on Nord Stream pipelines still affecting energy prices?
Absolutely. The Europeans became infrastructurally dependent on the Russians for 40% of their imported gas, and being pipeline gas, it's relatively cheap compared to LNG, no matter where the LNG comes from. So this was the backup for the energy transition, the so radical green energy transition in Germany, for example. When the wind didn't blow and there wasn't sun, they always knew they'd have Russian gas. That was sort of the dirty little secret. Okay, and it also kept German industry going, heavy industry going. When they lost that, that's their Achilles heel. So they got through that first year with heavy help from the Americans, who did a lot of diplomacy, who helped bring extra LNG, not only from the United States, but from Asia, where China didn't need it because they were in economic difficulties. They were just lucky. They got through. The wind blew. It was okay. They got through the winter. But it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory. German industry is talking about, all the parties now talk openly about deindustrialization. The price of energy is just too high. They have other bureaucratic and investment problems, but with the price of energy so high, roughly speaking, it's twice what it was before the war.
Can I just jump in for a second? I just wanted to ask Thomas a question. It sounds to me that there are other parties that benefit from here, just listening to you speak. One of them is the United States. As you mentioned, the United States made up for a lot of that energy with its LNG, and it now provides 86% of its exports go to Europe, a huge chunk. So somehow the United States has benefited from these pipelines going offline. I also want to ask, how does Russia benefit by blowing up its own pipelines? If it really wanted to just shut off the gas, which I question because it's actual money that we're talking about here, why wouldn't it just turn off Nord Stream 1? Why would it blow them up irrevocably?
Well, they had already turned them off, okay? They had to. You have to understand, Gazprom is not an ordinary gas company. It's an instrument of state. Think about the Russian army. It was used in Eastern Europe and in relationship to the West in the same way the military was used, as an instrument of state. For a whole year before the full-scale war, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin started manipulating the gas market in Europe. He was refusing to sell spot oil, spot gas, short-term gas sales to Europe to fill storage, which had really run down the year before. So why wouldn't he want to fill storage? There's no reason. He could have made a huge amount of money. The price was very high. The reason he also at the same time was putting troops on the Ukrainian border. I put two and two together. He's preparing for a war, and he's going to cut off the gas in the big pipelines. Our storage will be empty, and he thinks we'll give in and not support the Ukrainians. The Americans saw this ahead of time. There were papers written on this. There are op-eds in the Wall Street Journal in December beforehand that the Biden administration sees what's going on, and they're doing the diplomacy, and most Europeans don't believe them. They think they're being hysterical. Okay.
Thomas O'Donnell and Kelly Vlahos, thank you all very much. Really appreciate that. Well, blowing up the pipelines at the bottom of the sea is a complicated operation, and so is protecting them. In a moment, we'll hear from a former Royal Marine Commando. But first, let's look at some of the details involved in the attack on Nord Stream.
The Nord Stream pipeline system stretches 1,224 kilometres across the Baltic Sea floor, connecting Russia's Portovaya Bay to Germany's Greifswald. It crosses through 5 countries' territorial waters, buried as deep as 210 metres beneath the surface at the deepest points of the Baltic Sea. On September 26, 2022, military-grade underwater explosives, equivalent to 500 kilograms of TNT, detonated close to the Danish island of Bornholm, rupturing the pressurised lines, sending massive plumes of methane gas bubbling to the surface.
OK, let's bring in Joshua Hutchinson now, a former British Royal Marine Commando and now an analyst on maritime risk. Welcome to the programme, Joshua. I'm just wondering, who could pull off this sort of operation? We had people speculating it might be some, essentially some mercenaries, but it also may be state actor.
I think if we look about where this particular pipeline is and the amount of traffic within a particular area, you have to understand the complexity of such an operation that would take place. Therefore, it indicates that a level of state involvement would have been part of the instigation, and whether that's a direct involvement or indirect involvement. The understanding to conduct something and leave the area before the explosion took place is highly, highly sophisticated.
What are the challenges of exploding a pipeline like that?
I think, truthfully, these assets are fixed in location. Open source information can tell any individual with a laptop or phone where these assets are in the world. But actually conducting a kinetic operation that causes damage but not destroying or hugely detrimental is extremely sophisticated to understanding what type of charge, a shape of charge, and then being able to go down to that particular depth without drawing particular attention is as I said, extremely sophisticated and requires a scientific but also military capability.
Right, so the state actor that commissioned this attack, what sorts of people would they have been looking for?
Like I say, it's wrong of me to point towards a particular state, but I think we would be able to ratify that actually you're looking at a subsea dive capability, specific vessel operations and equipment that would have been used and required, and therefore to do that without drawing attention is also very specific, noting time of day, potentially the season at the time that it was used. To do that without drawing attention is extremely skilled. Therefore, maybe a level of ex-military knowledge and dive capability would be required.
So special forces with emphasis on the sea, then?
Most likely.
Right. And how do you protect against such attacks? Is that possible?
It is. I mean, there are authoritative bodies, maritime coordination centres, both at a territorial and international level, that are commissioned of some states to make sure that they monitor all traffic within territorial waters. But the levels and investment into this technology is quite vast, from a country by country, state by state level. Therefore, we also have to take into account the amount of traffic that goes to these particular areas, and that is almost a cover of camouflage in itself. Different types of vessel, different size, different speeds, moving in different locations. So taking all that into account, you can monitor, you can mitigate, you can intervene for these situations taking place. Whether the capability is there 24/7 is to still be understood.
Is it the case, Joshua, that these attacks have happened before, but not on this scale?
In reality, there are attacks. I think differentiating the difference between an attack and a mistake, whereas actually there are incidents, generic incidents happening every single day all around the world. Turning that into a malicious attack is obviously extremely severe, definitely if it has a potential state actor behind it. And I think what we're seeing more of now, both in the media with the coverage today, but also over the last 2 years, is the fact that the locations of these potentially high threat areas are coming to the forefront, but also the fact that it doesn't require a lot of technology or potentially ballistics to cause damage when you know where these assets are.
Do you know which pipelines around the world are the most vulnerable now?
Ambre, obviously, as a global risk management company, we monitor these assets on behalf of suppliers, installers, and state interconnectors as well. So we as a company monitor these assets in these locations. But as I mentioned, there are open source information portals that actively provide this information. So anyone looking to cause malicious damage wouldn't have to go that far.
Right. Joshua Hutchinson, thanks so much for your expertise today. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.